Good morning everyone, and welcome back to Radio Toni TV and Everyday Business. And we have been talking to Amir Meshel, real estate extraordinaire from Australia. Now Amir started his interest in real estate at a really young age after watching his parents renovate property from the age of 10. And then at the tender age of 16, he started investing with a little bucket of money, $5,000 indeed, and he has gone from there. And each week we have been talking to Amir about his stories and the knowledge and wisdom that he's gained along the way in buying and selling property. And as you know, last week we spoke about his properties in Oberon, and for something different this week we're going to talk about the words that you hear in real estate as compared to the words that you hear in normal English. And so the words that you use in English have completely different meanings than what they do in real estate. So Amir, welcome back to the show. Good morning, and how are you?
Fantastic, Toni. Thank you for welcoming me on again. I'm very well, and I'll tell you why. One of the things that I look forward to every single year is when the weather changes from the winter months to the summer months.
And I bet that's pretty apparent in Oberon, which is kind of quite a cold space in the southern New South Wales inland, and I bet you can tell the difference in temperature. So Amir's been back renovating property in Oberon, so absolutely you're going to notice the change in temperature. And was it hot last week there?
It was. I actually got sunburnt last week, and I always wear a hat and a shirt, so I do my best to stay out of the sun. But there was a 30-minute period where I ran out and did something and then came back in and went, oh, my skin feels hot.
Yes.
And so Oberon is considered an alpine area. So once you go over a certain number of feet or meters above sea level, they classify it as alpine. I think it's 900 meters.
So
900 meters above sea level is called as alpine, and Oberon's 1,113.
Yeah.
So it's actually the same level above sea level as Kathmandu in Nepal. So it is quite high above sea level.
I didn't realize it was that high. I knew that it had the propensity to get very cold and snow in winter, and that it could conversely get quite warm in summer, but I didn't know it was that high. That's very interesting. So yes, Amir's been renovating last week, and in between doing the show, he's back renovating again. But this week, we're going to talk about words, aren't we, Amir?
Absolutely. And Toni, I'm going to steal one of your words.
Yes. By all means.
Propensity. I love it. I love it. I'm going to start using more and more propensity in my sentences.
I like it too. I like that word too, which is why I use it a bit, because I don't know, there's some certain words in the English language that just roll off the tongue and make you feel good, and for some reason that's how I feel about propensity. Now, back to the conversation for today. So there's some words in the English language that mean, in everyday use, mean something. But if you're using them in relation to real estate, they mean something quite different. And so Amir and I are going to discuss some of those words today so that people listening can get to understand, if a real estate agent is talking about this word, this is actually what he means. And Amir, do you want to start with some of the words that we spoke about? And they're in relation to options. And I thought, can you briefly describe options in terms of real estate?
That's a very good question, Toni. I think we've covered a few disclaimers in the last few shows,
Yes,
and
I
I
was just
feel
going to
that,
say, here comes a disclaimer.
look, especially with options, with contracts, and with legal
Mm,
words,
yeah,
use a professional. So get a legal professional, because their job for you, when you pay them to represent you, they're going to make sure that they explain the words in common English terms and give you the responsibilities that you have when you're using one of those words, or if you're signing a contract that specifies one
yes,
of those words. So I'll give you an example. The people that I work with tend to use a legal solicitor that specializes in real estate to
uh-huh,
draw up or to write an option contract. And
mm-hmm,
really, there's two really big words that get used when option contracts are in. A put, put
yes,
option,
yes,
and, and a call option. So in normal terms, I guess when you're thinking of the word option, you tend to think of something that isn't compulsory. It's optional. It means that you can do something or not do something at your
yes,
choice. Legally, when you have the word option on its own, that could mean it, but if you add a word to it, like a put option,
yeah,
then it's an obligation for the
ah,
vendor, for the owner to do something. If you say a call option, then it could be a option to buy, meaning a choice for the buyer. But
ah,
if the owner sells a call option, they can't
mm,
change the price later.
right. So
In other
that's an
words, that
important
they've,
consideration, isn't it?
oh, absolutely. But maybe you want that.
Yeah,
The other side, the put option, is an obligation for the buyer to buy at that price or at that time.
mm-hmm,
So put and call are almost opposites to each other.
yes,
However, there are a few contracts, and again, speak to your solicitor about this,
mm-hmm,
where on the same contract, you would put obligations on both sides. You could do a contract that your lawyer draws up that says you've got both a put and a call option, meaning one side is obliged to do something, the other side is obliged to do something.
okay. Have you got examples of these in your real estate experience, Amir?
I do. Um, well, there's the interesting thing with the reason why people put down a call option or a put option is probably a better way to explain it.
Yes, please.
Quite often, and this really happened to me when I started with just $5,000 as a
Mm,
deposit.
yeah,
When you're in a certain obligation, your bank or your lender will look at all your obligations and make an assessment to say, can you afford to be true to all the contracts you've already signed? So
right.
think of it this way. Imagine you're running a theatrical show, and the capacity of the room that your show is at might be 1,000 seats. But if you sell 1,001 tickets to a show that can only fit 1,000 people, then you've oversold it.
Mm,
A house is very similar, except you're looking at one person buying it. So you're not going to sell the same house twice,
no.
because one of those people is going to miss out. So, in a very similar way, when you think about how much you have and how many times you can sell it, you might sell something. And if that first person who you've promised to sell it to
Mm,
pulls out, or for a reason beyond their control,
yes.
they can't follow through, then you have to close one door before you open the other door. That's kind of the simple way, Toni, of explaining what an option is,
Yes.
because you're promising to sell the house, but you haven't yet sold the house. So it's a future dated agreement where both sides have negotiated, or at least one side has negotiated and put it in writing and the other side agreed.
Mm,
Whether that's the selling party or the buying party, the obligations are real.
yes.
So once you've signed a contract with one person, and then a day later or half an hour later, somebody knocks on your door and makes you an offer that's twice the price, it's too late.
It
You've
is.
already signed the obligation papers. That happens both ways. So that happens if you're an owner, you've found somebody that's willing to buy your property and you sign that you let them, let's say you give them more time or you've negotiated on the price. They're really the two variables, aren't they? The
Yes,
price and the
the
time.
price and the time.
So if you've agreed to a time or you've agreed to a price, and then somebody goes to the next open house or rings your solicitor and says, a week ago we inspected the property, but we just didn't get around to finishing the offer, and now we have an offer for you, and that offer is more attractive,
You
either because they can
can't.
pay you faster or
Mm,
because they're offering a higher amount. It's too late. The person who now has the control of the pricing decision is the one that you've already agreed to.
yeah.
So we can really muddy the waters here and complicate it because the third person can now negotiate with a second person who's negotiated with a first person. And you can see how risky that
Right.
is. If
Okay.
you don't have the paperwork written the right way, then one lawyer can get upset with another lawyer, and there can be costs, there can be reputational risk, there can be the risk of losing more than just money. You could be tied up with arguments for a long period of time for no reason, because really
Mm.
you have two people that are happy originally, and by deciding to make changes at the last minute, you're just throwing a fly in the ointment. So yeah,
So,
it's
Amir,
very, very good,
in
but it's
in
very important that you do it properly with a legal representative.
yes. So, in simple terms, you could agree to buy property A at $300,000, but that you will buy in 6 months' time at $300,000. That's the option that you've got on the table. However, someone might come along and go, "Oh, I really want that property and I'm willing to pay 450." They can negotiate with the person who has the first option, but they can't negotiate with the actual owner. Is that true to say? Or is it involving
Yeah,
the owner as
yeah,
well?
that's
Because the contract is between the first two people, and it's too bad if you've got 450,000 that you want to buy the property with. You've either got to wait out that 6 month time frame for the contract, or you've got to negotiate with the person who has the contract to buy in 6 months for 300,000. And that's doable, but it's just a bit more complicated, isn't it?
the lucky thing, Tony, is that in Australia the rules are very clear. So we
Ah,
have, of the 6 different states and 2 territories, the rules on options are going to be set out very clearly. So both your solicitor that has a license to act in your state or in your
yes.
territory, and also Dr. Google have quite often have quite good links to where the official government statement is that
Yes.
explains who, why, when, and why
Mm.
and what.
Yes.
So yeah, there are very, very clear rules on this. So if your paperwork that you've already signed and agreed on
Yeah.
says that the option is for a call option, for example,
Mm-hmm.
let's say that a person approaches you and they're the buyer, and
Yes.
the other person on the other side is the seller, and the buyer says, I'd like to have an option, a call option, in 6 months' time at 300,000.
Mm.
Part, part of the wording of the agreement might include the
Ability to
ability for
negotiate.
them anytime before the 6 month period is up to agree to start the contract. What
I
does that mean?
see.
That means 2 weeks into their 6 months, they can turn around and
And
say,
go,
you know what?
let's
Today I'm
do
going
that.
to exercise that option. So it's still going to be the 300,000,
Mm.
but the option they have is usually stapled to or attached to a purchase contract.
Mm-hmm.
So the option is the document that says
Mm-hmm.
what they're obliged to
To
do, what
do.
you're obliged to do. but that's quite often attached to the actual selling contract without a name on it.
Yeah.
So it might be, and again, check with your solicitor here, but
Yes.
it might be the paperwork for the sale of that house or that property with all the details listed of what they're actually buying, but not signed and not dated. The actual contract is not signed or dated. But the option means that they have the right, but not the obligation, to buy.
So if you were a savvy buyer and this was your particular circumstance, you could actually take up that option, purchase a property, and then immediately resell it to the person with the $450,000, thus making $150,000 profit without too much effort. Is that correct?
Minus tax and minus
yes,
fees.
yes,
So
of course, commissions and all that's involved in buying a property.
And there's a few extra steps because you bought it at an option. So if you buy it at an option for 300,000 and you're selling it for 450, you have to own it first. So if you're selling it at a different price to what you bought it, in New South Wales, you'll end up actually buying it, and then on the same day or the next day or 4 weeks later or 6 months later, you can sell it at a profit. There are some things you miss out on, which is why it's important to think about it from an accounting and a tax point of view as well. So if you were to live in that property for 12 months, 13 months, just over a year, you might, depending on your tax situation, if you're an Australian resident and you're in New South Wales, you might get a few discounts on your taxes, on your duties, on your obligations for that change. So that might give you, if this is the only house that you've bought, it might give you a 50% discount on your capital gains tax. It might give you 0 capital gains tax. You might get a 50% discount on your land tax, or you might pay 0 land tax.
Yes.
So there are a few things you need to check with your accountant.
Yes.
Accountant as well as your lawyer.
Yes.
But in an option, to put it very simply, if you were to buy something and sell it, you can sell it once it's yours.
Yes.
So you might negotiate with the person who's buying for 450 for them to help you pay the first part, so that even if the bank wouldn't normally say yes to you, you might be able to, if you have another security, for example, you might be able to do something where the buyer or the ultimate buyer is paying your purchase, and then a week later they do a second purchase for the additional 150,000.
Yes.
Or you might do a lot of things in between. The good thing about an option, because it's not an obligation, it's only the right to do something, is that you've already negotiated with the person who owns it on how much money they're going to get out of the deal. But when you have the option, it allows you to still communicate between your solicitor and their solicitor and suggest things that might work in both benefits.
Yes.
So let me think about, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the buyer.
Yes.
I'm trying to buy a house. It's $1 million house. My bank says that at the moment, the house that I'm living in hasn't been sold. It's advertised, but nobody's actually made me an offer yet that I've accepted. So when the bank tries to pre-approve me or to approve me to buy the $1 million house, they now think that I'm going to be holding 2 separate mortgages, the one for the existing house, the one for the new house. So the bank has 2 options. Either they say, okay, we can see that when the second house is bought, one of them will be rented out and the other one wouldn't. Or the bank might say, we're not happy having that much risk in the same suburb, so we'll only allow you to buy one house with your current circumstance. So first we'll wait for you to sell before you buy. Or they might say that they will only agree to it if you do a simultaneous, on the same day, swapsies. So I'm using a common term. That's not a legal term.
It's not a technical term. That's one we understand.
Technical term is swapsies.
Yeah.
So if you're
exchange contracts on the same day.
If the bank says that we can settle both contracts on the same day, then you now have to get the person who's buying your house, the existing house, and the person who you're buying from, the seller, to both like the same date on the calendar. That might
Oh,
work, that might not
tricky.
work, because people have to move house. They have to
Mm.
have their finances ready. They have to have their mortgage being ready to be discharged. So it's
Lots of moving
sometimes a lot trickier
parts.
than you think.
Yeah. Okay.
And you've got three different solicitors involved.
Yes.
So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if it's not going to work for you, then either you miss out on the property you're buying, or you're missing out on the seller the buyer who wants to buy your house.
Uh-huh.
So there's benefits to writing options and there's risks to writing options.
Mm.
But if I was to put myself into the shoes of the buyer and I knew that I wanted to buy something, but I only wanted to have one mortgage at the end,
Yeah.
there's always a cost to doing an option. So if I was to approach the person selling and I'd say, okay, well, I'd like to buy your house, but I'm not fully committed to buying your house.
Uh-huh.
I'm only asking you to give me the right to buy the house at the negotiated price, but I may just walk away.
Right.
The person who owns the house isn't going to like that. They're not just going to say, yeah, just that's all right. I'll sign my obligation.
Yes.
Do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, no.
It has to be practical.
Mm.
So the cost for it, yes, you have to pay your solicitor their fees to write the contract.
Yes,
The
because it's
other
a
side,
specialised
the
contract,
current
isn't it,
owner,
Amir?
and the current owner will have to pay their solicitor to read through and agree to it. Apart from those two fees, there's usually an extra amount of money that goes to the current owner
Ah.
to say, look, if you do this for me, I'll compensate you financially, and here's some money for you. And that's quite often called an option fee.
Uh-huh. And
Why is it called a fee?
well, it is a
There's a
fee, isn't
reason
it?
why it's called a fee. So the buyer walks away, then think about it from a taxation point of view. The owner, the person who owns the house at the moment, has made money, but it's not a rental income from that
Mm.
property.
Mm.
So if they've earned money, they would need to tell the tax agent that they earned money, because the money wasn't a gift. It was actually a fee for a
And earn.
service,
Yeah.
right? So they've earned money on it. If that buyer has decided to commit and they've gone, right, now we want to go through, make this a formal contract. Now we have a beginning date. Let's start the 42-day or whatever's on the contract, a 35-day settlement. Let's start the countdown for it. There is a possibility for both lawyers to agree that the initial fee, the money you've paid for the owner to consider you, to convert that fee into part of the deposit.
Oh, that's not a bad idea, though, is it?
It's not. It means that the owner has successfully sold their property
Correct.
at the price that they agreed to. It also means that you haven't lost money on speculating, on guessing.
Mm. Yeah.
So it kind of works for both people as long as
Yes.
the contract terms were agreed correctly.
Yeah.
The catch is, and this is the risk to the buyer,
Uh-huh.
if you're paying somebody a fee for an option, in most cases, you're going to tell them that they can keep the money whether you walk away or not, which means you're going to release that money to them as not a deposit that they have to hold until you decide, but quite often it means you're releasing that percentage to the owner and the owner can just run away.
Okay. Okay.
So what do I mean? What do I mean by run away? Well, they're not
Take your
going to
money and
relocate the
run.
house, right?
Yeah.
It's unlikely for them to get a truck and just relocate the house from Queensland to Victoria.
Yeah. Yeah.
But depending on how the contract is written and what your solicitor has agreed to do and what their solicitor has agreed to do, you can legally put your foot on the house, meaning that your name gets written into the
The owner.
government paperwork, the government's paperwork.
Mm.
And what that means is that if the owner ever decides to sell it to somebody other than you and you put your foot on it, they have
They
to first
can't.
pay you out or to
Uh-huh.
get the agreement from you to sell it. And depending on the contract, that might mean they need to pay you out
Mm.
a certain amount of money, like 300,000 or maybe even more than what you bought it for.
Right.
Depends on the contract.
Yeah.
So there are ways for an option contract to be protected. And all those ways, Toni, come back to the beginning. Get a good
Yes.
lawyer.
Yeah.
Make sure everything is negotiated in very clear language that makes sense to your lawyer, and your
Yes.
lawyer has explained it to you.
Mm.
I mean, that makes sense in everything. If
Yeah.
you're buying something for $100 or $50 and you can afford to lose that money, it's not so much of a risk. If you're buying something for 100,000, 500,000, $1 million, or 50 million, it's a big risk. And so
Yeah.
you're going to pay your lawyer to do their due diligence and make sure that the wording suits you.
Definitely. Definitely. Okay, so that's a really comprehensive overview of options and option contracts and what they look like. The next thing that we wanted to talk about are the words, and this I'm smiling because it sounds unusual for me to use these words in real estate terms. So in normal English terms, the next two things that we want to talk about are wrap and sandwich. And I'm going to hand over to Amir to explain what that means in real estate terms, because in English we all know what a wrap or a sandwich looks like and what that conjures up, but it's completely different in real estate, and it's important to have the clarity and understanding around the difference. Over to you, Amir.
I have to admit this, Toni. I'm actually experiencing a Pavlovian response here to that, and I think that yeah, I can feel my stomach rumbling, and yeah, I'm hungry. I don't know how that happened. Yeah, look, chicken wrap. Ooh,
Yeah, yes, chicken wraps are really
the
nice.
wraps and sandwiches sound great, and
Mm-hmm.
we spoke about a put option and a call option, where a
We
call
did.
option is somebody saying, "I'm the buyer. I'm going to agree to your price, but I'm not. I'm going to give you a fee, but I may pull out at the end, but then you'll keep the fee."
Yeah.
And a put option is the same thing, where the vendor is saying, "You're now going to buy this. It's not optional anymore.
You're going to
So
do it.
on this date, either that date or before, this is your obligation to buy." So it's either a no obligation to buy or an
Or
obligation to
obligation
buy.
to buy.
And if we were to put these two things together, a call and a put option together as one contract,
Mm.
then we can put a put and call option together,
Yes.
which part of it benefits the vendor,
And part
the other person is the
the
buyer,
buyer.
the person buying, and the time frame in between is the bit where at this date it becomes X amount, and at that date it
It
becomes that
becomes.
amount. So then you really can have a few different
Mm.
dollar amounts and time amounts within
Mm.
one big contract.
Yes.
Again, speak to your legal professional. But that brings us to what a wrap and a sandwich is.
Yeah.
Think about a wrap or a sandwich as something where you're getting the answer that you want, but there are steps involved along the way
Uh
that
huh.
are agreed to steps. So, for example, let's say I've just graduated university. I have an excellent career ahead of me,
Mm-hmm.
but I find that I need to move to a different country town so that I can start working in my profession. I have the option of moving to a country town and being a renter, or buying a house in a new country town, but the bank is going to look at my employment history, not just the
Ah.
hypothetical, but they're going to ask me for pay slips. So
Yes.
really, I'm not ready today, but I'm ready today.
Yes.
So what do I mean by that? It means that I have faith in myself. I already have a job lined up. I can choose to go with a bank that will agree to those terms, but then they'll charge me a little bit extra interest on
Mm-hmm.
because of their risk.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can say, okay, you, Mr. Owner, Miss Owner, Dr. Owner, that already owns that surgery, that consultation room, that
Uh huh.
residential house, I guarantee you I'm going to buy this in 2 years' time.
Mm.
I want to rent from you for 2 years, but during that 2 year time, I don't want to move interstate, start living in there, build a great reputation for my new profession, my new surgery,
Uh
my new
huh.
dental office, and then you sell it because it's successful, because that's not fair. If
Yeah.
I'm a renter, you can sell it whenever you want.
Mm.
So I want you to guarantee to me that if I'm renting from you and fixing, painting,
And doing
making a
all those
suburb,
things.
making a suburb location that's a growing business, that's really well known. I've invested time and money into this. I want you to guarantee that now that I've added value to your location, you're not going to just up the price. So
Ah.
what we'll do as a buyer, I'm suggesting to you the price that I'm going to buy it at, but also I'm going to give you the obligation for the next 2 years. I'm going to be your renter. I'll continue renting this property from you,
Mm-hmm.
and half of my rent will just be to pay your expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Half of the rent, I want you to consider that into an account that just keeps accumulating, and that's going to be my deposit in 2 years' time when I buy your place. So in effect, I'm not going to pay
Ah.
you a fee, an option fee. I'm not going to pay you a deposit. I'm going to start renting,
Mm-hmm.
and the completion of the contract in 2 years and 3 months' time is that we've started a relationship as a buyer,
Mm-hmm.
but you knew right ahead of time that
Yes.
I'm going to buy this only in 2 years and 3 months' time.
Yes.
Because after 2 years, I can show my tax return to the bank. The bank's going to love me.
That's right.
And we've already agreed on the price. Meanwhile, you're earning money. And if I walk away, you keep the whole rent. But if I
Yeah.
decide to buy it, half the rent you keep to pay your council rates, your
Listen.
taxes, your stamp duty, whatever else you need to do. And then you can do whatever you like. You can sell it, you can rent it to somebody else. All I've done
Mm.
is improved your property.
Yeah.
But if I buy it, then that 50% that you've accumulated becomes my deposit,
Deposit.
which means when I'm asking for my bank
They
how
can
much they're
see.
going to lend me, I haven't wasted all of those
Mm.
2 years of rent. I've wasted half of it just paying rent money, which is gone, but
Yeah.
half of it is like a savings account, a
Count.
compulsory savings account towards the purchase.
Mm.
And look, to be honest with you, if my business doesn't go well in 2 years, I don't think it's going to go well there in 5 years or in 10
Yeah.
years. So I'm probably going to use my experience to get a job somewhere else and point towards that as my experience in the field after getting my uni degree.
Uh-huh.
Now, that's a good sandwich for both, because at the beginning,
Definitely.
you've got a deposit as a renter. At the end, you've got a deposit as a
As a
buyer,
buyer.
and the meat in the middle is the profit from the rent.
Uh-huh.
You're covering both sides. Beginning deposits, safety, end deposit, safety, meet in the middle is profit. So it's a
Yes.
win-win for both. In
Yes.
a way, it's similar to an option deal, but because you're complicating it by the fact that the person moves in at the beginning, lives there, pays their insurance in
Yeah.
case something happens and accidentally the house gets demolished, or you'd be surprised at things that happen when a tenant is in there, especially if they're
Mm.
trying to do a renovation, but something is uncovered during the renovation.
Like
With a
asbestos
sandwich
or
deal, or
water
if
damage
they've
or
accidentally if they've done a part of a demolition and they've accidentally cut a supporting beam that they weren't supposed to cut that was hidden behind something else,
yeah.
unless you've got the original plans for the building, you're relying on your builders to do the right thing, and
Mm.
they've got their own insurances, but it's still your responsibility to do it the right way.
Yes.
So this way, the person who's the tenant in there has written permission to do
What
whatever
they
it
need
is that
to.
your two lawyers have agreed on, but the insurance is now specified. And that means that you can allocate a sum, or you can have different terms like professional indemnity insurance,
Mm.
construction insurance.
Yes.
You can allocate certain dollar amounts where your tenant is allowed to do anything up to $5,000 or anything up to $20,000 worth of parts and labor.
Mm-hmm.
So both the construction materials and the payments made to plumbers, electricians, etc. So now you can specify what can and can't be done
Mm.
with permission, what requires further permission, what
Mission.
requires council permission. So really, the sandwich deal or the wrap can
Mm-hmm.
give it more complexity, and all that complexity can be done between the two lawyers. And that written option contract is called a wrap because quite often you have an option contract tied to another option contract. It might be a call
Ah.
option at the beginning, a put option at the end, and a pain point that says if at the end of the put option you haven't paid,
Mm-hmm.
then all of your rent money becomes
Their
the
money.
owners and
Mm.
they have no more obligation to deal with you.
Yeah.
So there's lots of steps involved, or
Yes.
lots of ingredients in a food thing. So if you're
Yes.
thinking of a wrap and you're going to add your tomato
That's
sauce,
the
your barbecue
food
sauce, your onions, your
analogy.
cheese, and your meat,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the food analogy, but
Mm.
you're getting enough food in the middle to feed you as
Mm.
ongoing rent.
Mm.
So to juxtapose the two of them, do you like that word,
I
juxtapose?
do. I do indeed. I do.
Compare the two, to
Mm.
juxtapose the two, you're going to look at one option deal, which is I'll pay you a little bit now, and then you're not getting anything for another 12 months until I settle or don't settle.
Mm.
The sandwich or the wrap deal is I'll pay you a little bit now, every week or 2 weeks,
I'm
whenever
going to
the
pay
rent
you
is due,
some
I'll
more.
keep paying you a little bit. And then when I decide to buy it, maybe it's 6 months in, maybe it's 24 months in,
Yeah.
whatever it says in the contract, I can jump in and buy it, but then you're being fed all through the process.
Yeah.
And I've got a house to live in, to work through, to improve on without having to call you at the number of
Mm.
times I need to send um, a plumber, a builder, a carpet layer for inspections,
Yeah.
for the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So it gives you a lot of options from both sides. I don't mean the word option. It gives
It
you
gives
a
you
lot of possibilities
yes,
from both
opportunities.
sides.
Yeah.
So opportunities. So the wrap deal and the sandwich deal are also known as a rent to buy.
Yes. How common are these types of contracts, Amir?
For a rent to buy that only has I rent and then after the amount I'm paying to buy, it's quite uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
For a wrap deal that includes an option to do something and then at the end do something and transfer it, that's a lot more common. The rent to
Ah,
buy is a very, very specific type of a
it
sandwich
is.
deal. But
Yeah.
the sandwich and wrap deals that include some sort of change to the property, that's quite common. The three most common are from the time that you've signed the option to the time of settlement, the buyer might be allowed to apply to council with your permission to change the material change of use,
Yes.
meaning that
A
if
DA.
you have a house that people are living in, not just a DA, it's a material change of
Change.
use.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a house that somebody is living in just as a residential house, but you want to change it to a pig farm,
Okay.
your neighbors may not be happy
I was
with,
just going to say the neighbours are going to be so unhappy about that idea.
but if your area allows it and your street allows it,
Mm-hmm.
then you can apply to council for a material change of use and they will assess it.
Uh-huh.
If it's something your suburb doesn't allow, then you're not going to try to put a pig farm on a standard street, but you never know.
You never know. It's a good example to
So
remember how that works,
it's a
though.
very good
A
example.
good example,
But
yeah.
look, in reality, Toni, it's a lot easier than that. Most people say, look, you built a house to
Uh-huh.
have one family living in it. I want to change it to a duplex, or I want to change it to a rooming house that can have
Mm.
7 different rooms for 7 different families at the same time, which means the council says I have an obligation to put in more smoke alarms, more fire
And
protection, separate each
parking
room,
and
have more exits, more
mm.
parking, disabled facilities. So
Yes.
there are a lot of things that a council or some councils might say, okay, if you want to change it from building type 1 or class 1
Ah.
to building class 9, then to go from this to this, you have to apply for a material change of use to say, yes, we're going
Mm.
to allow that many people to live in such a high density compared to what was there before.
Yeah.
You might also have to do construction and building certifications using the BCA, the Building Code
Yes.
of Australia.
Mm.
So there might be little tick boxes you have to do along the way. But if you were to take the risk first, buy the house and then ask for permission,
Yeah.
what if the council says no?
That's a much
What
more
if halfway
risky
through,
scenario, isn't it, Amir?
what if your neighbors object?
Mm.
But if you've got time on your hands because of a wrap deal or because of an option deal, and the owner agrees to you being allowed to ask for permission to do a
Yeah.
material change of use and to let all your neighbors know that that's what you're planning to do,
Mm.
then they're not paying the mortgage on the majority of the
No.
interest because they haven't paid you the whole amount. They've paid you either a fee or a deposit. Let's say it's 10%. So
Yeah.
if you're buying $1 million house with the hope of turning it into a
To
rooming house, a boarding
mm.
house, something that has a lot of different families living side by
Yes.
side, but without calling it an apartment or a hotel or a motel,
Yeah.
then during that time frame, you may have paid 100,000 as your fee to the owner, as your 10%. If everything's successful at the end, that 10% becomes the deposit. But you're also investing 10,000, 15,000, 25,000
That's right.
for the engineers, for your specialists to draw up where the borders are going to be,
Uh-huh.
potentially where the strata is, or where the
Yes.
body corporate is, potentially where the fence lines up and where everybody has their own allocated outdoor living space. That's their
Mm-hmm.
own private living space.
Yeah,
So all these things where you're spending money,
that's
that
right.
increases the value
Of
potentially for
that
the owner,
property.
but only if it's approved.
Mm.
Otherwise, you're just throwing money away.
Mm.
Now, scenario A, you bought the place and you have 12 months to do it. So
Uh-huh.
you've borrowed $1 million, and on top of the million, you're spending 25,000 to investigate.
Mm-hmm.
In scenario B, you're paying 100,000 as your fee to be able to do
Mm.
the research. You're spending 25,000 to do the rest. In
Yes.
scenario A, you own that property for $1 million. You bought
Yes.
it for a million and you've spent the 25,000. If the council says no, you still own the property.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
If the price goes up, you've made money. If the price goes down, you've lost money.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you think about just the interest rate, let's say it's 5% interest.
Mm.
On $1 million, the interest rate you're paying is lost money on top
It
of
is.
what you bought it for.
Mm.
During the time when you're constructing, where you're renovating, where you're waiting for council to say yes, you're not receiving rent. So
No.
quite often when you're doing demolition work or you're doing
Yeah.
construction work that involves plumbing, electrical, putting in fire protection walls, it's not practical to have a tenant in there during that time.
No.
So you've got 1 year where you're losing money on your interest rate to the bank, 1 year where you're
Mm-hmm.
losing money because the property's vacant, and
Mm-hmm.
you're taking a gamble that a year later the property's worth more. Now that's a risk. In option B, you're still taking a gamble and you're still
Yes.
spending 125,000. 100,000 as your deposit and 25,000 for your research. But during that time, that is the only cost that you're losing. So let's say your interest rate is 50,000 during the year on $1 million,
Uh-huh.
and you're throwing away the 50,000 just to the bank,
Yeah.
or you're using your deposit of 100,000 that is lost if you lose, if you can't do the
If you
change.
can't do that, yeah.
But this is the best bit. If in a year's time the property has gone up in value, you've now got the right to use it, to buy it
Yes. And
with that 100,000 you've already put into it anyway, even if you
yes.
can't do what you wanted to do initially with your $25,000 for the material change of use. So this is a very deep topic with a
Mm.
lot of
A con-
contracts involved,
yes.
right?
Yes.
So the contracts, the legals, and your team, your A team that are going to give you advice. So, like
Yes.
the students that I work with, they use the team that I've worked with before to
Mm.
say, have you done this before? What suburb? Show me an example. And can we do exactly the same thing on the new property?
Yes.
This is where your team of experts comes in.
Yeah.
It's useful to have somebody that knows the council, that's worked with that same council before, because they'll know not just the written law, but the interpretation within that council,
Yes. Because
and
it
also
can
that,
it can be different from council to council how they interpret things like material change of use, can't it?
especially state to state, New
Yes.
South Wales to Queensland to Victoria have
Yes.
different ways they interpret material change of use. Um, there's a lot of obligations to how heavily licensed the expert that's providing the report has to be in each of those states.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a dramatic difference on the cost of investigation for you.
Amir, is that part of the reason why you gathered this team around you? So it's not just about your knowledge, expertise in real estate. It's about the people that you have in your team that help you to make better choices about real estate, and for people who don't think that they have opportunities to start in real estate, it's about making people aware that there's all these different things that you can do, but don't do it by yourself. Do it with someone who's done the hard yards and who's developed the team and can guide you along the way. That's the best way to do it, though, isn't it?
It is, but when I say that it's the best, I think of it as what are the two options? We
Uh-huh.
talked about option A and option B.
Yes.
In option A, you're losing money to the bank straight away. So your interest of 50,000 is thrown away.
Yeah.
In option B, you're risking 100,000, but there's a few
But,
things that could potentially go right for you, which
mm,
is if you get a yes for the material change of use
mm,
and your 25,000 is well used and the 100,000 is well used,
mm,
or that suburb just has gone up in 12 months
yeah,
and the 100,000 has is now less than what the price has gone up by.
yeah.
And during that time, remember you haven't bought the place, you have the
No,
right
you're
to buy
just
the
doing the
place.
real,
So
you're just
if
doing the
you,
research, aren't you, Amir? You're just checking
that's
out
right.
the options of what you might or may not be able to do in a certain amount of time.
And if something during that time is nicer than what you're doing, so let's say that this is an exciting project for you,
Uh huh.
but 6 months in, another project has come along which gives you more profit or is in a better location or
Ah,
something that
yes.
excites you more, you can sell that option off. You can sell the property off without ever owning it. And because you've got the right to buy it, the page on the contract that doesn't have a name and doesn't have a signature on it or a date can
Mm.
be somebody else's name and signature for the same price you've agreed to. In other words, you're walking away, they're jumping into your shoes, and the price that you've paid, the 100,000 obligation, would be one of the terms that you agree with for the person buying it to pay you back the 100,000 you've invested. So one of the freedoms of having an option is, yes, the person
Yes.
selling it is going to get paid that amount regardless, but it might be you buying it. It might be your business name.
Mm.
It might be your
Mm.
self-managed super fund name. It might be a different person's name. As long as it's the same price, you can put anything into the contract because the contract has already been agreed. So
Aha.
again, use the right lawyers because that only only benefits you, and it benefits you in so many different ways. The first one is that you can now have somebody else jump into your shoes,
Mm.
or you can let time increase the value of property where it hasn't cost you anything for that
Mm.
increase. The 100,000 deposit is paid back to you when somebody else buys it in a year's time. So starting with a very low deposit means you're
Yes.
quite often forced into doing an option deal because you don't have the 100,000 deposit, but you can
No.
negotiate. I've seen, and this is not my example, it's somebody else in Australia who's done this.
Mm-hmm.
They've done an option for $1,000. They used a $1,000 option fee that the vendor agreed to.
Mm-hmm.
Why did the vendor agree to such a small amount of money instead of a 10% deposit? It's because the final purchase price that was agreed to happen in 2 years' time or 3 years'
Mm.
time was dramatically
Worth it.
above the market price. So it was worth it for them. So let's say that their house was worth $1 million.
Mm.
The person that didn't have much deposit on hand went up to them and said, "We'll only give you $1,000 now, and you get to keep the $1,000. But during the space of 2 years or 3 years,
I'm
we're
going
going
to
to spend
do.
money with counsel, with investigation, with whatever needs to be. But instead of buying it off you for 1 million, I'll buy it off you for 1.25 million. So you're getting $250,000 extra
Extra.
just by agreeing to hold off for 3 years and let me do whatever I want to do with your permission."
Which is really an interesting way for young people in particular. If you think about young people in Australia, with property prices the way they are, what you've just described is doable, isn't it? It's achievable for young people to get into real estate if they have the right advice from the right team. I'll clarify that.
I'm going to give you one more disclaimer there, Toni.
Okay,
If
good, good,
you're
good.
if you're promising somebody to buy their property at 1.25 million and you know that it's worth 1 million, so you're spending more than it's worth,
Yeah.
then the risk is that you're now thinking either A, you're going to add value to it with manufactured growth,
Mm.
B, that suburb organically is going to grow,
Yeah.
and C, disappearing, and C, number three,
Yes.
you'll be in a position where the bank will say yes to you in 3 years' time. So if you're a
Yeah.
young person or you're somebody who's just changed from one type of job to a different type of job, and you feel that at the moment the bank won't say yes to you, but
Mm.
once you have work experience, they will,
Mm.
you're assuming you're still going to be in that job for 2 years and that you like your boss, you like the
Yes.
work, you like the environment,
Mm.
and the economy continues in that type of role.
Yeah.
So there's future risks that you can't predict because you're looking so far into the future. So
Yeah.
that's my other little warning light to
Yes.
say, if you're going to use the idea that, just offer somebody 1,000 but offer them more at the end, you're going to pay that at the end. So don't forget that.
Mm.
Otherwise,
Mm.
yes, you've lost $1,000, but also you're going to burn yourself out with your time and your investigation to try to get this to work,
Yeah.
when it was never going to work in the first place because your numbers don't stack up.
Yeah.
So you really need to do your numbers before making an offer.
Yeah. Yeah. But it really does open up the world of real estate in a lot more ways, doesn't it? Using some of this terminology to think about property, or think about a property's potential or future potential in terms of suburb growth, whether you can split it in two, whether you can make it more high density, etc., etc. There's lots of different ways in which you can look at using these terms to get yourself into real estate. And I know that we've talked about this before, Amir. One of the points that you made in an earlier show was that the majority of wealth and rich people in the world have real estate as part of their portfolio, don't they?
Not the majority, no.
They don't? Oh, okay.
100%.
100%. Yes.
It's not 99.9 something. It's 100%
everyone
of people that
have real
that
estate.
are considered wealthy own real estate, whether it's just their own home. At the very least, they own the roof above their heads. But there are no people out there that are wealthy
that don't have real estate as part of their portfolio.
That are still renting.
Okay. So every now and then you'll hear the discussion across the media about, oh, it's better to rent than to buy. But what you're saying, and from your experience, no, it's always better to aim for owning some sort of real estate, whether you live in that real estate, whether it generates its own income for you. Real estate is a stepping and a platform to wealth and intergenerational wealth, isn't it?
So I'm trying to think of anything that falls outside of those lines. I love it when there's a good generalization you can use that doesn't really insult anybody but just works for everybody.
Yes.
So I'm thinking of it this way. If I was a big real estate company and I decided to put my real estate on the Australian Stock Exchange, to list on the stock exchange, and the public grew aware of what my financial situation was, would that put a larger target on my back? Would that mean that somebody is likely to try to find out where I live and have a dramatical self-inflicted accident to try to skirt outside the legal terms to try to take away some of the wealth I've accumulated? So I can see why somebody would want to protect their assets.
Yes.
And asset protection means that if you're owning a house in your own name and somebody trips and your insurance doesn't cover it,
yes,
then
you don't lose the house.
Problem.
Yeah.
From what I've learned from decamillionaires and centimillionaires and billionaires, people that are worth 10 million, 100 million, or $1 billion,
yes,
there are different structures that would protect your assets.
That's
a whole other episode, Toni, and I'd love to do that in one of our next shows.
I know. That's fascinating, that stuff. It's fascinating.
It is. But what asset protection means is that if you grew up in a family house that either one of your parents or both of your parents owned, and you continue earning income and making your profit, making money while still living in your parents' house, not paying rent, but actually your parents owning the house.
Yes.
There are structures like your self-managed super fund that you can't live in.
Yes.
But there's structures like company structures, like self-managed super funds, like family members' names, that can be separated from you as your profit increases and your assets increase, so that on paper you may not own property, but in reality you control tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions worth of property.
Yeah.
So
I can't wait to have that conversation. Let's make sure we have that conversation, Amir, because it is fascinating and not a lot of people talk about it or make that information available to the everyday listener, which is what we're about, is making sure that everyday people have access to information that might in fact change their life and help them to have something that is their own and to which they can pass on or have a legacy around, which is why part of what you do, isn't it, Amir, is that wealth creation and legacy making so that generations get to pass on generational wealth and knowledge and information. And in talking today about these different options to around real estate and what you can and can't do within real estate, I still find it fascinating, and I see a lot of this happening in and around the area in which we live at the moment, where lots of family-owned properties are slowly being and having their material change of uses done, and suddenly seeing little cul-de-sacs with 5 little developments that was once a much bigger property, and knowing that it's a family-owned property and it's a family subdivision, and perhaps the kids' names are the names of the streets, that sort of stuff. That's a whole different thing, isn't it? And a wonderful subject for another show.
It is. And I think that the thing that drove me to that discussion, the reason why I went off on that tangent, is that I read something in one of the Australian newspapers.
Yes.
That a famous real estate mogul, an owner of a real estate agency that went public, now has sold their last property and own 0 property, which is great. But if you did an ASIC search, if you did a search on the Australian Securities website,
yes,
it's a paid
another
search,
fun,
it's not free.
Another fun place to poke around.
You might find that they're a director of a trust, and the trust in its list of assets might own 10 or 20 properties. So yes, in fact, they don't own any properties, but they control because of a trust that they're a director of. But the trust owns, and a trust can be a completely different entity.
Yes.
It's considered as its own entity, which means that if somebody wants to grab your money, they can't grab the trust's money, because your job is just as a director to manage just for the benefit of the trust. So
that's a whole wonderful conversation.
Surface level things. There's surface level things in newspapers that the newspapers are great entertainment.
I know.
But it doesn't mean that they're a great education.
I was just going to say, in terms of media, we should never think of them as education, because their job is to create hype or whatever it is. They're not educative platforms, are they, Amir?
There's some good editorials in there.
Yeah.
But their main purpose is to entertain, to grab attention, and to keep your attention.
Yeah.
Think of it as a novel that's written in the system of non-fiction.
Yes.
So it's a novel written about everyday stories that are actually happening, but their job is to make those stories interesting.
That's right.
Not by lying, not by exaggerating.
Just making them
interesting.
interesting.
But they just need to give you enough, not to teach you, but give you enough so that you
triggers
read
your
and go,
interest.
oh, is that right?
Triggers
your interest.
Yeah.
Triggers your brain to start thinking about things. But they're never the complete answer, but they're a good start.
Yeah. Amir, we are out of time again. Another amazing conversation and education for our audience. I'm really appreciative that we get to have this time together every week. Thank you so much. That, my friends, is your lot for this week. We will be back next week with some more exciting topics around real estate, and I can't wait. Amir Meshel, thank you so much.
That's
Bye for now.